Welcome to the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED with Kevin and Noah. In this podcast series, we will cover all things related to indoor cannabis cultivation. Hello and welcome to the Cultivation Cast by Black Dog LED with Kevin Frender and Noah Miller. In this podcast series, we will cover all things related to indoor cannabis cultivation. Today, we're going to specifically cover a recent test that we completed regarding the Massachusetts wattage requirements. They have a limited wattage requirement, which we'll explain in a moment. But what we were curious about is them being the first state that's rolling this out for commercial cannabis cultivation. And there's already talk of rolling it out to other states and even restricting it further inside the state of Massachusetts. We felt it was worth exploring what that does to a grow. How does a grow work and how can a grow work when you're running under these restrictions? You know, normally when we set up a grow, we have customers that set up grow with high light, low light, medium light. But the point is they get to pick that and set up the light best for what they're going to do or what their goals are or how their cultivation how they like to run their cultivation. So in this case, you're limited, and everyone inside the state of Massachusetts is limited above a certain square footage. So the very small grows in Massachusetts don't, but everyone with any legitimate good size grow and above to the largest grows, they are going to face wattage restrictions for their lighting setup. So again, we'll go over those details in a moment, but what we did is we wanted to set up a test that was an analog to what they had to do in Massachusetts and then grow inside of that, those constraints and see what we could produce, see what the end results would be like using, of course, the Black Dog LED Phytomax 2 series with that wattage restriction. So let's just jump in real quick here, and I will talk a little bit about what the actual requirements are and what they have. So in the state of Massachusetts, they are rolling out, or they have rolled out what's called lighting power density. And for them, it's any tier 1 and 2, and those tiers are for square footage. So, for example, tier 1 is up to 5,000 square feet. Tier 2 is 5,001 to 10,000 square feet, according to the regulations in Massachusetts. Those tiers are restricted to 50 watts. Not too bad. You can still run DE, maybe HPS. You can run LED, of course. And that's not too much of a restriction based on what we see in the industry on average. However, once you get above tier 2 and you go tier 3 or higher, up to their highest tiers, then you're restricted to 36 watts per square foot on average for the entire canopy of the facility. And that's critical because the way it's written, you can take wattage where you might need less wattage in cloning, of course, or in your vegetative area, use less wattage there, and then steal that wattage and apply it to your flower rooms. Again, your goal is you need to remain below 36 per watts on average for the entire facility. So based on that, we went ahead and created an analog. Like we said, we first laid out what a full facility would look like. And then we went ahead and backed in and made our own test. And Kevin, why don't you explain exactly what we did to come up with our numbers for the test and how we laid that out?
Yeah, so we basically looked at what a typical commercial facility would need in terms of vegetative room compared to flowering room in terms of square footage of each. And since the plants start off smaller in the vegetative stage and grow up, you typically don't need as much room in the vegetative areas of your facility as you do with the flowering rooms. Also, typically the plants are in the vegetative areas for less time. So you can actually have a vegetative area, a vegetative room, essentially, which is actually servicing more than one flower room, providing more than one flower room with plants. So on average, we see about half of the typical area in a typical canopy area in a commercial facility being dedicated to vegetative growth compared to the amount of flowering. So in a full facility, dividing everything up equally, you'd be looking at about 1/3 of the total canopy area being in vegetative and 2/3 in flower, meaning that the vegetative area is about half the size of the total flowering area. So what we did was set up what we thought was a reasonably sized typical flower room. We modeled one out that was actually 33 feet by 20 feet. And then we came up with a vegetative room, which was roughly half the size at 23 feet by 16 feet. And we put lights in there as though we were going to get the maximum we could within the power restrictions put by the state of Massachusetts, so that the average between the two rooms, total canopy area between the two rooms, was actually 35.4 watts per square foot. So by using that, we were able to figure out exactly what wattage density we could put over the vegetative area, as well as what wattage density we could put over the flowering area.
Great. And then we scaled that, right, Kevin, down to, obviously, this was done in a test facility where we weren't going to scale a full Massachusetts commercial grow into that and run wattage restrictions here in Colorado that weren't necessary. So, we had a test bed that we had access to that was 6 feet by 6 feet. And it just worked out perfectly where, normally in a commercial facility, we would use our Phytomax 2 1000. It's the most cost effective per watt. But in this case, to get the proper wattage and coverage, and for this test, we ended up using 4 of our PM2 Phytomax 2 400s, which are 420 watts apiece, for a total of 1,680 watts.
And that gave us about 43.75 watts per square foot over the target area, which is pretty much exactly what we had modeled with our larger model for a typical commercial facility in Massachusetts. So by actually using just slightly less than 20 watts per square foot in the vegetative room, we were able to then borrow the extra wattage, apply that to the flower room, and get it up to 43.75 and still have our average over the entire canopy be 35.4 watts per square foot, well within the restrictions.
And let's spend a brief moment on the vegetative you're speaking about, Kevin. People might question the wattage we're applying in vegetative, but we'd like to make it clear that we know that wattage is going to provide a great vegetative facility for growing the plants you need to get them into flower. We're not cutting it short with LEDs. Again, with metal halide, that would be an extremely low because the efficiency hit on a metal halide light. But with the wattage Kevin was talking about, we can definitely get good vegetative results.
Yes, even with 19.7 watts per square foot of LEDs over the vegetative area, we were actually able to deliver just shy of 300 ppfd over the entire area. That's micromoles per square meter per second of light intensity. So that's actually on the middle side of what we generally would recommend for vegetative growth. It's definitely going to give you very nice, robust vegetative growth. We've pushed it up to 500 in some tests before 600 ppfd. But honestly, once you start getting above 600, we've actually seen negative results with the plants getting too much light for 18 hours a day. And so 300 ppfd is actually very respectable. We got very good growth out of this test with it.
Yeah, and if you want, you listen to some of our other podcasts where we've spoken about the lighting intensity and how it works differently for different times. Again, as Kevin was pointing out, running 18 hours in veg makes it a very different scenario than running 12 hours of light in flower. So you got to accommodate for that. And that's what allows us to really dip down on the energy in veg and still get good results with our lights. So that's how we essentially, as Kevin was explaining, we modeled a full facility following these restrictions, and then we shrunk it down and scaled it down to something that was a manageable test. So let's talk a little bit more about the actual test bed, as it were, no pun intended there. The test bed, as we said, was 4 of our Phytomax 2 400s. To make it nice and simple, we ran a standard, what we would use in this type of space. We did 4 rows of 4 plants, so we had 16 total plants. We used one of our favorite test subjects for this, which is Super Lemon Haze. Those were brought up as normal in veg, running normal veg nutrients, but we did finish up in 5-gallon smart pots is what we flowered in that setup. So again, we've got 16 plants in 5-gallon smart pots. And we did do, in case you're wondering about plant care, we followed most of the 3-Elite recommendations that we use. We did run the entire flower cycle using Success nutrients, which we've had great results with. And so we did things like heavy topping in vegetative to get a nice even canopy. And then, of course, defoliation on day 0, the first day of going into flower, and then in the 18 to 21 day range. Again, at the end of this, we will discuss, we have a place where you can find all these results, and then, of course, see videos, including a time lapse of the entire grow, just so you can see how it went down and how it worked out. But so that's really the test bed we had. Again, a 6x6, 4 of our Phytomax 2 400s, 16 plants. We did run slightly shorter than often with R&D. Most of our R&D runs at 10 weeks of flower. Just to make it more real, we find a lot of commercial grows tend to run a little shorter. So we ran this for exactly 9 weeks of flower. So a little bit shorter than normal. It should have brought the yields down a little bit, but it does allow a commercial facility to figure in more turns per year on average for the rooms because you're getting it done a week sooner and you can flip that room into another flowering cycle. So that's really how the room was set up and how we got there, how we even got to that room setup. The main point here is to look at yields. That was the goal of the test. Our test was to find out what we could produce with these wattage restrictions. But we'd be remiss not to discuss briefly the cooling savings offered by Black Dog LED grow lights and increased temperature. Again, you can read about that on the Black Dog site, blackdogled.com/LST for least surface temperature. And so I'm going to run through this data quickly because it wasn't the point of it, but you can find all of these numbers are published on our case study website, which is commercialgrowlights.com. So commercialgrowlights.com. So with the cooling, what we do is we want rooms run warmer with our lights because our lights do not bring up the leaf surface temperature like you'd see under traditional DE, HPS, or any HPS bulb for that matter. So the room is run warmer, and what that effectively does is save you on cooling costs significantly. We like to see it run about 9 degrees warmer. And so what that translates to in this setup, if we were to take this and scale it out to a full type of grow, what we see is that you'd be saving about $557,136 in cooling per year. So about $500,000 savings per year on cooling with the lights. Now, that's great, and that will definitely help pay for the lights. But what we really care about is yield. So if you want to learn more about the cooling, reach out to us or check out the data on commercial grow lights. But what we're going to do is move on to the meat of the study, which is what everyone cares about and why we're all listening and doing this research to begin with. So we ran for 9 weeks, and when we took down the 16 plants, we trimmed and dried that all, and we ended up with a total of 2,604 grams or 5.74 pounds. Now, we need to talk a little bit about industry average before we go any further. We've spoken to a lot of people, both the industry experts being growers and people in the industry, as well as consultants who get to be involved in many, many grows around the country and internationally. And what we get constantly is feedback that the industry average truly, if you look at grows across the board, look at their yields, including good harvests and bad harvests and all that stuff. And what the feedback we get is anywhere from 35 grams per square foot up to 45 grams per square foot is the range we hear from different experts that we believe are knowledgeable enough to provide that information. So for the rest of this, let's just be fair and go very conservative and say, great, the industry average is 45 grams a square foot. We'll take the extreme high side of what those people think about. So if that is the industry average, and you go back to our 2,604 grams, we divide that out. What we saw out of the 36 square feet, a 6x6, was 72.33 grams per square foot. Now, again, the industry average being 45 grams, we are significantly above that at the 72 mark. So that's also good. And for those of you from the old days where we used to talk a lot about grams per watt instead of grams per square foot, that does come out to, with our wattage that we ran, 1.55 grams per watt. So just over 1.5 grams per watt of dried, finished, cured cannabis. So moving on with the industry average being 45 grams per square foot, what we saw was an increase of 27.33 grams per square foot. That's a yield increase of 60.7 above the 45 grams per square foot.
60.7%.
Yeah, correct. Thank you. 60.7% increase. So now, we can all debate forever, and it depends what market you're in, what the value of that is. But we went on a simple, just $5 a gram. That's the value, whether you're selling it wholesale or getting it out through your own dispensary. That value of that would come out to $136.65 additional revenue per square foot. Using our lights above the industry average of 45 grams. Now, if you assume 5 harvests, which is on the low side, if we're running 9 weeks, you can really get in more than that. But let's say conservatively we get 5 harvests out of a room at that 136.65. That would be an additional $683.25 per square foot per year. That's for any good size grow, that's good money, and that's money you can take to the bank. Now, going from there, if we assume the cost of a Phytomax 2 1000 is $18.99, and just to be clear, that's on the high side for commercial. When we get into larger commercials, that price does come down further. But again, we're going to be conservative for this discussion. So our Phytomax 2 1000, which is 1,050 watts of power at the plug, it's $18.99 for this discussion. So if we look at what the return on investment is for that light, if we take the coverage equivalent for the case study of 1,050 watts divided by 47 watts per square foot, as Kevin explained, that's what we ran at, assuming what we could take from our vegetative area, we end up with 22.34 square feet of coverage for that 1,000 in this case study. So we can look at the value increase of that per light, saying taking the number we came up before, which is the $136.65 per square foot, multiply that by the 22.34 square feet we would cover with that single light, we end up with $3,052.76 per year per square foot.
And again, that's just the increased sale value of your increased yield that you could get running our lights compared to a traditional HPS.
Exactly. And so the ROI period, assuming $18.99 price for that light, again, a bit high for a large commercial facility, is going to be the $18.99 divided by the 3,052. So you're looking at 0.62 flower runs to pay for that.
In other words, they pay for themselves well within the first flower run.
Yeah, which is critical because, again, everyone knows that LEDs cost more, but what people need to really do is assess the real lifetime cost of their purchase decision if they go with HPS or LED. And if you look at it, as we're saying, you're less than one flower run, you've covered the difference between you've covered the cost of the entire light, not even the difference between a double-ended HPS. You're just covering the entire cost of the light in less than one flower run versus an HPS. So obviously it's an investment made in the lighting, but based on these numbers, it comes back to you many times and very rapidly. One other thing we'd like to point out is, we, as everyone that's familiar with our lights knows, we are one of the only ones providing a true full spectrum from UV to IR. And part of that is the UV is a critical part that does increase canopy penetration. But the other thing it does is produce better quality cannabis. It's going to elicit the response we want and get us frostier, smellier, tastier, and more potent cannabis. And so we were curious to see with this what it would do as long as the test was finished. We sent the majority of the flower, a total of 2,250 grams of the flower, to processing for an extract run. What it yielded was 449 grams of shatter, or a 19.55% return, almost 20%. And when you get up to the 20% return on a extract run, you're up into the really good range of exceptional returns. An average return might be down in the 10-15% being solid, but when you get up in the 20%, which we're right up against that, it's a very good return. Again, industry average from talking to a lot of extraction people tends to be about 15% return for that type of run. So what do all these numbers mean? We just threw out a bunch and we're talking about this case. So it's, it is fun, and to us, it's a learning process always. And the reason we do a lot of this is for our customers. So now as we work with our Massachusetts commercial customers, we can provide more in-depth insight and actually speak from experience versus just guessing what we can do under these wattage restrictions. But let's talk about what these numbers really shake out to. So the increased revenue per light per year, with 5.7 harvests, which is what you'd get with a 9-week turnaround per year. What we end up with is the $3,052.76 that we came up with per light, times the 5.7 turns per year. So that's going to come out to $17,473. Sorry. That's going to come out to $17,400.73. That's the additional revenue you would receive with our light over traditional HPS per year under these restrictions.
Per light.
Now, if we take that, the smallest tier in the Massachusetts ruling that is that is applicable to this is a 10,000 square foot grow. So if we take what Kevin spoke about earlier, about 2/3 of it for flowering, let's just say that's around 6,000 square feet. So in the smallest tier, the smallest grow, and they can obviously be much larger, you're looking at 6,000 square feet. We could divide that out by the amount of coverage we'd get from one of our lights, as we spoke about earlier, being 22.34 square feet per light. And we'd end up with 268 of our Phytomax 2 1000 lights over that 6,000 square feet of canopy. So if we take that 268 lights and we multiply it by that harvest, the additional revenue you get from your harvest per year per light at $17,400, we come up with $4,663. Sorry. We come up with $4,663,200 of additional revenue from the LED grow lights that we provide for this setup versus a traditional HPS. That is not what you'd make. That is the additional revenue that you'd see from a full facility running under these conditions. So over $4.5 million extra additional revenue that you'd get per year.
Which is absolutely incredible. It's, yes, 268 lights up front is going to cost you quite a bit of money, but it's going to be a lot less than $4.6 million. So, I mean, we've already seen the ROI was actually less than one flowering run. And for over a whole year, it makes a huge difference to the bottom line.
That's an excellent point. And Kevin, do you have any thoughts on how this really works in the real world in terms of, can people just go ahead and set up their own facility? Should they just throw lights up and, see what they can do? Or, you helped lay a lot of this out. Can you go through real quickly what, if somebody came to us and said, yeah, I'm from Massachusetts, I need to do this. Could this be applied quickly and easily to their commercial grow?
Absolutely. Although every individual grow is going to be a little bit different. Once we get actual building plans for the facilities, then we can help determine what percentage of the area should be flower and veg and cloning, account for things like mother rooms and other things, which, by the way, because they have lower light requirements, just gives us even more extra wattage that we can throw at the flower room and increase yields in those flower rooms. So by working with our commercial customers out in Massachusetts, we're able to customize a solution which is very close to this, in many cases actually better than what we actually tested, and get them the optimal solution for their particular facility.
Good point. It's interesting. We were a little concerned when we first heard about these wattage restrictions. It's we don't necessarily agree with them. The ruling or the rule that they put in place was really to, according to the state, it was to help with the fact they have a very old infrastructure in Massachusetts. As I think we all recently saw, unfortunately, there was some major gas line explosions. There's definitely some older infrastructure out there on the East Coast, and they were worried about the power hitting their grid in that area. So they put this rule in place. Now, we feel it could have been done in a more comprehensive and more effective way, such as limiting the wattage for the entire facility. Because if you spend money on LEDs, but then you put a terrible, inefficient air conditioning on the facility, sure, you're going to save money on your lighting, but you're still causing the same net effect of too much power being run through the grid. So we feel it should have been a bit more of a holistic approach when looking at the entire grow, not just lighting. But again, we were worried about these, and now that we've run this test, Kevin, I don't know if you'd agree, I think I have a lot less concerns about facilities being able to be profitable, and not only profitable, but very successful in the Massachusetts market.
Yeah, I mean, we were still able to get 77 grams per square foot, which is well above the industry average for facilities that are not in areas with any wattage restrictions. So, I mean, honestly, you could still run a facility in Massachusetts and be more than competitive with the average, for example, California facility.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So that's good news, I guess, all around for everyone. We're very happy with the results of the study. Again, just to remind you, all of the data, and a lot more than we've covered today, because we do believe in sharing all the data, it's all on commercialgrowlights.com. That's plural, commercialgrowlights.com. And you can find a link from that on our site if you go under the commercial menu item on the blackdogled.com website. So thank you again for listening. We hope you enjoyed this installment of the Cultivation Cast. If you have any questions about the content or have an idea for a future topic, please send us an email at podcast@blackdogled.com. Again, that's podcast@blackdogled.com. We always like to hear from our listeners, and we try to get in any requests for topics to cover. We love them, and we will try to cover them as quickly as possible. Thanks again for joining us, and happy gardening.